Before I begin, first of all, can you all hear me at the back there? Nice and clear? Excellent. Can I do just a very rough straw poll? How many of you have visited 10 countries? Oh, wonderful. Good audience. How many of you have been to 20 countries? Okay, so you are obviously sensitized to the differences in culture as you traveled and perhaps even came across some surprising situations and surprising differences between our culture and the United States. So let me begin with what exactly is culture? In a nutshell, it's a society's collective wisdom over thousands of years sometimes, very often over hundreds or many centuries. And those become eventually institutionalized rules of behavior. People stop questioning those rules. They take it for granted. They are socialized early in life. Parents, family discipline, religion, and eventually formal schooling, so that a point is reached where they no longer question why they are doing things certain ways in their own culture. And it's really only when they go abroad to a foreign culture or even to a radically different culture that they begin to realize that so much that they had taken for granted isn't practiced in other cultures and in other countries. And those adopted rules from childhood then become that culture's norms and values. Rules that help people solve daily problems, recurring human problems, permanently. And so you can substitute the must I to should I. Should I be time conscious and punctual? You probably don't question this. And you think, well, yes, because that's how I was socialized in my culture. I shouldn't be late. I shouldn't keep people waiting. Should I be fastidious about personal hygiene? Should I be kind to animals? Should I be respectful of those older than I am? Another example, should I bring a gift whenever I'm invited somewhere? And another one, should I wear a suit, or what should I wear when I attend a funeral? And on that note, let's do a whirlwind tour of the planet with clothing. What people wear. Now, let's keep in mind three things. Clothing serves three functions. One, it has a protective function, right? Keeps you safe from the elements. And so the materials that are used and the designs that are used to make clothing have that protective role. Second function of clothing is display. People want to display what their culture has created for them in the way of clothing. But also there's a personal aspect to that, so that what they wear is sometimes a statement of who they are. And finally, clothing has a third role, which is modesty. That throughout the world and around the world, we have rules of behavior and standards and mores about what can be exposed in public, what should be shown to others in public, and what should not. All right, are you ready for the whirlwind tour? All right, here we go. This is a Bolivian shaman. He's from the Aymara tribe. And this is Lake Titicaca, the world's highest navigable lake. 12,500 feet above sea level. You really are short of breath when you get there, even though you may not have done any walking, climbing, or running. And this shaman is giving blessings and saying prayers for the visitors that you do not see in the picture. So he's wearing classic Bolivian, Lake Titicaca in the region of the border between Bolivia and Peru. So from South America, let's shoot to Asia. This is Borneo. This is the country of Brunei. Some of you may have heard of the Sultan of Brunei. Because of Brunei's oil and gas reserve, he's probably the fourth richest person on this planet. But he doesn't keep it for himself. What he does is try to make his people happy by using that money to pay for their education, schooling, to pay for their university, to pay for their medical assistance, to pay for hospital, and so forth. So that people in Brunei are actually very well taken care of thanks to the Sultan's openness and generosity. These are university students from the University of Brunei. And they have a visitor here, a little fellow from Australia. And you can see from their expression that they're very fascinated about this fellow. And they're asking him very pointed questions. And of course, very bemused, they start to giggle about some of the answers that he gives, because he is the stranger to them. Let's move now to another continent, North America. This is Cuba, and the island of Cuba, and this is the city of Camagüey, which is roughly in the center of Cuba, and it's at a farmer's market. You can recognize the image of Che Guevara there. He is an absolute saint there. In fact, he is more visible and more admired than Fidel Castro ever was. So he is really to them a hero, revolutionary hero. Observe, for example, that they are much less covered, and therefore the third roll of clothing, very different from the previous picture that we saw in Brunei. Let's move up to Russia, far eastern Russia. Not far, in the city of Khabarovsk, not far from Vladivostok, where the Soviet used to keep its navy during the Cold War. And every Russian family, just about every Russian family, has a summer getaway called a dacha. And you will see there in the background their dacha there of this family. And that's their escape from the city during the summer and spring months. He is preparing, I think he's barbecuing lamb on skewers. In Russia, they call it shashlik, and he's using charcoal to heat the little hibachi there. Now let's jump to another part of Asia. Back to Borneo, but this is Malaysian Borneo in Sarawak. And these are schoolgirls. They caught me taking a picture of them. Some were quite bemused about it. Others were a little bit suspicious from their looks. And this is how they dress for school, and this is how they go on outings. In fact, this group here was part of a school outing. Let's skip over to South America. This is in Colombia, in the town of Taganga, which is on the Caribbean coast of Colombia. And she is presumably selling fruit that she can juice, like the apples and the pears and the bananas and so forth, for customers. For some reason, she decided to keep the can where she gets the change and keeps the money between her legs. Maybe she doesn't trust the bypass. All right, let's go way north from Taganga, Colombia. This is the very northern tip of Quebec, so it is already in Canada's far north proper. And as you can see, even in summer, temperatures can be brutally cold. She is dressed appropriately for that, but she was welcoming us as we came off our expedition ship to visit this little settlement called Kangig-Sugjuak. They have changed many of the Anglo-Saxon names to their native names, so Inuit. These people used to be called Eskimos, but they're Inuit. And now let's go to a very hot place, Oman. This is in the town of Diba. These are merchants. They all have their little shops or stalls or so on. And towards the end of the day, they like to relax. And so they sit down or they squat around a little rug and they play a game of cards. Now let's go to Myanmar. Myanmar is the new name for Burma. I'm sure all of you are familiar with Burma. And this is on the Irrawaddy River, going from Mandalay in Burma, down the river and on the way to a very historic town called Bagan. There's a ferry passenger that does this passage from Mandalay southwards every day, and they're always waiting there to sell their wares, their fruit and so forth, to travelers on that ferry. In this situation, of course, they're trying hard to sell whatever they have, and even there's a little bit of haggling about the price for each of those items. Now let's go far north again. Northern tip of Greenland. This is in Kanak, used to be called Thule or Thule, and it is the northernmost town on the planet. These kids are basking in August sunshine, so they get 24 hours of sunshine. And they were joined by a little girl from Vancouver, British Columbia, and they were quite amused to have visitors visit their little town. Now let's go back to Malaysian Borneo. This is in Sarawak. This is the town of Kuching. Kuching is known as the city of cats. Not because it has lots of cats wandering around, but because they have built statues to cats. All kinds of statues in public places to cats. I have no idea where this came from, but Kuching is known as the city of cats. And they are in an open market. Each one has her own stall or his own stall, and they sell their wares, whatever they can be. In fact, in this particular market, you can find everything from watermelons to ladies' underwear. Back north, this is on Devon Island. It is the world's largest uninhabited island. Nobody lives there. And it isn't a tiny island either. It takes 3.5 days for a ship to go right around this island. So you can get some idea of the size of it. These people don't live there, but they agreed to do a drum chant for us. They're also Inuit, and this is very much their traditional dress and this form of rhythm and music. Devon Island is so desolate that when NASA was designing the rover for Mars, they found a meteorite crater on this island and tested the rover in conditions which were remarkably similar to planet Mars. In fact, there's so much ultraviolet light falling down on this part of Devon Island that it was excellent for testing whether the rover could take, huge amounts of ultraviolet light and not fail. Now we're in Peru. This is not far from the city of Cusco. If any of you have been to Peru, you will very often see ladies dressed like this. This is a little weaving factory. She's demonstrating plant dyes, natural dyes, and that's how they get their blankets and their shawls and their scarves, those bright colors that she has there on her hand. Let's go up, stay in South America, we'll go up to Quito, Peru. This is a parade on the day they celebrate in Quito, which is sitting right on the equator, the day when the Spanish king, about 300-400 years ago, gave limited autonomy to the city of Quito. So they celebrate that each year. As you know, the Spanish were the conquistadors and dominated South America for several centuries. And to the desert. This is in the Rub al-Khali, which is the empty quarter of the Arabian Peninsula. A very desolate place. If you're not well prepared, you're likely to die there. And yet I found a surprising amount of wildlife there. They have desert foxes, they have lizards, they have snakes. I could even spot flowering plants growing on top of the sand. That's this is the border between Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and that's my guide there from Dubai. You do not want to go into a place like this without a guide. And a four-wheel drive vehicle, if I may add. And finally, going down to Africa. This is on the northern part of North Africa in Morocco. It is in Berber country. The Berber tribe is fiercely proud of its origins. They have actually Jewish and Christian origins long before they became Muslim. And so they are a very independent people, and they do not like they're in the mountains, the Atlas Mountains, and they live quite a unique lifestyle compared to the Moroccans who live in the lowlands. So let's do a little bit of exercise here. If we are ingrained and socialized in our culture, we often ask, well, doesn't everybody do this? Doesn't everybody read printed text from left to right? No, they don't. This is a sign at the border of Oman, Marhaban bakum fi Saltanata Oman. Welcome to the Sultanate of Oman. So you notice I started reading from this end and went to that end. This is near the town of Diba, so I guess they must have had a bank branch in that town. Let me tell you a little story about reading the wrong way. Some years ago, I don't know if it was Procter & Gamble, so I don't want to offend them in any way, but it was a similar situation, and I found this ad in, I believe it was a Canadian magazine. I thought, oh, that rang a bell. So they had simple theme here. You know, they'll take a dirty sock with ground in mud and grass, call it dirty. Then competitors' washing powders and detergents don't do a very good job, and the results come out dingy. But our Tide with bleach makes your clothes dazzling. So they thought, well, this is good. You know, few words. We don't need too many words. Let's adapt this to the Arab markets in the Middle East. Okay. So as you can tell, they just translated the main words. Not much text down here, and then the brand name. And so you can imagine that people reading from right to left are asking themselves, what is this detergent going to do to my clothing? Amazingly enough, they did not take the trouble to ask the locals. You know, check it out with the locals before you design a campaign and then put it up on all these billboards which you see throughout the Middle East. Doesn't everybody do this? Occasionally participate in survey research. You've all had some experience with survey researchers coming up to you asking to be interviewed, either in a mall or even you get a formal letter from a marketing research company and they ask you to fill out a questionnaire, or they even phone you in advance. We would like to do a survey. You have been randomly selected. Could you please agree to participate? In many, many countries, you cannot do that kind of marketing research. People don't want to give their information. Anything, age, marital status, let alone all the other income questions that you get on survey research, and of course, buying patterns and buying habits. So in many cultures, it's very difficult to do marketing research to find out really what the people think about your product or the product class, how they like it, what problems they have with it. Very difficult to do. It can be done, but it's got to be done in a much more careful and personal and well thought out way. Otherwise, you just don't get answers. I mean, they will not even begin to answer the questionnaire. Doesn't everybody leave shoes on when entering the house? Well, we often do that, right? We run to the car, we get in the car and oh, I forgot something. Run back into the house. You don't bother to take your shoes off, right? So, do people not do this everywhere in the world? No, definitely not. In many cultures, Japan, Korea, China, Iran, many parts of the Muslim world, Middle East and North Africa, never leave their shoes on when entering the house. In fact, when you visit people in one of these cultures, you will find that at the entrance to the house, there's this whole lot of shoes lying there. People have taken them off, and they either enter the house barefoot or they put slippers on. By the way, while I'm on this subject, in the Islamic world and many other parts too, Japan and Korea as well, the sole of the feet is considered the lowliest part of the body. It is unclean, and it is in every way rude to have people see the soles of your feet, let alone the soles of your shoes. And yet we find so many times business people, right? They'll have a business discussion, and the executive will put his legs up on the desk, right? And they'll chat away, soles of the shoes straight in the face of the other person. That would be unimaginable in these cultures. You would be murdered for doing something like that. No, not really, but it's just never done. Doesn't everybody sit on chairs at the table to eat dinner? Well, some of you already know the answer. We were doing a little tour in the Persian Gulf, and the sheikh of this little island called Kish knew that we were in town. We had come off the little Arab dhow that we were traveling up and down the Gulf in, and he invited us for dinner. Now, we didn't quite expect such a sumptuous dinner, but there it was prepared for us, and of course we sat on rugs on the floor. You'll see spoons and forks there, because I think the Sheikh of Kish realized that Westerners probably are not going to eat with their hands. They eat with their hands. Very often even rice and even runny food ingredients and so forth are eaten with the hands. Doesn't everybody make peanut butter sandwiches? No, of course not. Peanuts, terrible, terrible thing. Peanuts are a very lowly nut in many countries. It's regarded, for example, in India and Iraq and Iran and places like that, Pakistan, as elephant food. So peanuts are never eaten. They're thrown to elephants in zoos, or they're fed to elephants when they're hungry. And doesn't everybody go yuck if they were offered a breakfast of sheep feet, sheep testicles, stomach, and head? No, it's a delicacy. In Afghanistan, northern Pakistan, Iran, it's an absolute delicacy. They take the entire animal at 3 o'clock in the morning, dump it into boiling water, add some seasoning, and by 5 o'clock you have people crowding the restaurant, sitting around and eating all kinds of delicacies like this from the sheep. In fact, a very, very special offer from a host in these countries is the eyeballs of the sheep. And you're supposed to accept it, otherwise you offend your host. And, well, I recommend you quickly swallow and don't say anything. Let's keep on with the topic of food, because it does have some cultural variation here, and interesting too. Guinea pigs. In Peru, they're a delicacy. They're not pets. Right? People don't keep guinea pigs as pets. They cook them, they roast them. Sometimes I've seen them fried and breaded, but they're delicious. I have tried it, guinea pigs in Peru. Peruvian restaurants will serve it to you. It's always on the menu. It tastes like chicken. So if you don't think about this poor little animal that could be a Western pet, you might enjoy your meal. This is in Greenland. And our friend here is using a knife to cut up raw seal meat. Now, it may look a little bit bloody and yucky and so forth, but they have different parts of the seal that they carve up and chop up and so forth. That over here is the heart of the seal, the liver of the seal, flesh from the seal, blubber from the seal, and so forth. And I was offered this. It's, at first, I did the yuck thing, but it's amazing. I tried some of this thing. This is the staple food of the Inuit. All over the Arctic Ocean area, on both sides, Russian side and also on the Canadian, Alaskan side and so forth. People eat seal meat because it really does keep you warm. I ate a piece, and I think it was seal heart, not sure, maybe liver, and within 15 minutes I could feel my body warming up. I was not imagining this. I almost started to sweat. So there is a tremendous amount of calories given off by seal meat. And they survive on it. The Inuit have only this in terms of substantial protein. Anybody for baby turtles? A delicacy in China. This was in Canton, also called Guangzhou in China. And turtles are boiled, and then I don't know how they shell them. I guess they scrape the meat out, and it's quite a staple in the Chinese diet, the Cantonese cuisine. Fresh live snakes, anybody? Again, the same market. I took a picture of these snakes, and they're purchased. They're also a delicacy. I was told they do taste like chicken, and they are boiled and then consumed with other meals, with other components. Doesn't everybody pay fixed prices for food? Well, here we do. Can you imagine me going down the supermarket, picking a box of cornflakes, and maybe, a bottle, the container of yogurt, and then going to the cash register and saying, I'm such a good customer of yours. Could you give me 10% discount on the cereal? Oh, I'm sorry, sir, barcode, everything's got the prices already in the computer. No, but really, look, I've been coming here for years. Can't you give me a 10% discount? Sir, I can call the manager. Maybe you would like to discuss it with him. No, they don't pay fixed prices for food. In very many cultures, you will see that if the price isn't marked with a label, with a tag, some kind of marking, that it's open for bargaining. These are cassowary birds. They are this is Malaysia. They are the Malaysian equivalent of poultry. They're raised, they're fed, and then they're skinned and then sold like this. So they're treated very much like poultry, and of course you can bargain the prices until both vendor and buyer are happy with the final price. Let's go all the way to the Galapagos Islands. Anybody here been to the Galapagos Islands? Highly recommended? Absolutely. Tell your friends all about it. Most amazing surface area, land on this planet that I have ever encountered. There is such a fantastic concentration of wildlife that in such a small space, in such a small area, that it's unbelievable. These animals are unafraid of humans. They have never been hunted. So the baby seals will come out of the water and they'll tug at your pants, and you're not supposed to touch them, right? That's the rule, right? Hawks standing on a pole there, right? I couldn't get a better shot. He's just looking at me in the camera. And things like this. So the animal is just amazing there. But anyway, they have, of course, a lot of fish in the middle of the Pacific, quite far from Ecuador, but they are islands that belong to Ecuador. And you can see that the fish are carved up, cleaned, and so forth at the fish market, just there on the spot. So people come and they bargain with the fishmonger to get the right price and then take them home. Notice the sea lion there. He thinks he's part of the act too, right? There's not afraid. So he crawls out of the water, comes up there, and he's wondering whether that man in the green shirt and the knife is going to throw him a little tidbit. Same with the pelicans. We're hungry too, they say, as they come out of the water. So they pick up the scraps, or they're thrown the scraps and fed at the same time. This is again Morocco. This is on the Atlantic coast of Morocco, in a town called Essaouira. I highly recommend this because it's very historical. It used to be a Jewish settlement, but after Islam sort of became the majority religion, it kept all its old architecture. So it's a fascinating place. I have been to Marrakesh and I don't recommend it. It's very touristy, and sellers are rude, and they're always wanting you to kiss the snake and do this and do that, and money, 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 the hand is always out. But not here in Essaouira. It's a very, very interesting place. So he's got all kinds of olives there, and no price tag, so it's an invitation to bargain for your food. Let's move on to another thing that we get very often accustomed to. Doesn't everybody hug or kiss upon greeting a close friend? No. In many, many cultures, adults do not touch each other in public. So if you go to say, a place like, I don't know, maybe Libya or Syria or Iraq and so forth, you will find that even husband and wife greeting each other after somebody's arrived from a trip will not touch each other. They might politely bow or a little smile and so forth, and then they go home and they can do what they like in private, but never in public. I was horrified. My wife's Japanese. I think many of you know this. And when I first met her parents, they had flown in from Japan. I was living in Australia. They had flown in from Japan, and we went to pick them up. I had never seen them before, but my wife was there, so she was waiting for them at the reception when they come out through customs and picked up their bags. So they come out, and oh yeah, there they are, and they come out with their baggage trolley, and I could not believe this. My wife just bowed to them. "Can I help you with the bags?" I said, "Miyuki, aren't you going to hug your mother? You haven't seen her for 7 months." No, we don't do that in Japan. After the age of 7 or 8, the Japanese never kiss or hug the person. So up to about 8, the kids are cuddled, hugged, kissed, and so forth, hold their hands. After that point, no touching whatsoever. So yeah, that was a lesson for me.
And how about
Sorry?
How about when they got home?
When they got home, they must have probably had hugs and kisses behind closed doors. I have no idea. I have never seen my father-in-law and mother-in-law ever touching each other. Unless she falls on the floor or something, and then, of course, he'll pick her up, right? You hope so, right? Yes, doesn't everybody mix freely with members of the opposite sex? Sadly, no. We are very accustomed to having, parties where men and women sit together, chat together, exchange stories, and so forth, eat together, sit at the table together. In many countries, especially in the Middle East, and you will also find this in Southeast Asia, and to some extent in India, when there is a gathering, and the guests are invited, you will very quickly see that the men gravitate to another room and talk with each other. Sometimes the men will hug and kiss each other, but never touch the women. And the women will gravitate to another corner of the room and chat and have their, chit-chat together. Doesn't everybody arrive at the arranged time for meal invitations or business meeting? Oh my goodness. If you are cooking for guests, be prepared to keep that fire going and keep the food warm. If you show up at the appointed time, you will be the first person there, and you will be waiting a long time before the remainder of the invited guests show up. So they could take 1.5, 2. I remember one incident where the guest arrived 3 hours later, and the rice was still warm, and they were served, and nobody was offended. Time is treated very much flexibly in those cultures. We don't. I know that time is precious, of course, in North America and many other Western nations. But in these countries, in these cultures, time is not regarded as such a precious resource. It is not rigid. There's a huge amount of flexibility in the time when business meetings actually begin, even though they know the time of the meeting, and when guests arrive, for example, for social occasions. Doesn't everybody, where are we? Yes, doesn't everybody consider the number 13 unlucky? No. In Western African nations, the number 2 is unlucky. So when Carlsberg breweries was developing that market, they had a brand with a label on the bottle showing 2 elephants, and nobody would buy that beer. So they had to relabel, and the next shipment had 3 elephants on them, and that was okay. In Japan, the number 4 is unlucky. The reason, because the number 4, shi, in Japanese sounds very much like the Japanese word for death. People don't want to be reminded of that word, and so very often you'll hear Japanese counting, instead of saying ich, ni, san, shi, they'll go ich, ni, san, yon. Yon is fine, but shi sounds too much like death. Russians, when they have a first date, it's almost de rigueur that they will buy carnations and roses, but the number that are in the bouquet or in the bunch must be even. If it's a funeral, the number of flowers in a bunch must be odd. Very quickly then, values, the 6 dimensions of culture: values, ideas, attitudes, traditions or customs, artifacts and symbols. I'll give you examples of each of these quite briefly. Let's look at the value of what qualities would you like your children to have. You're the parents, you're disciplining them, you are training them and so forth. What qualities would you like your children to end up having? Well, this survey was done not too long ago, and they used the qualities qualities knowledge or education, creativity, cooperative spirit, independence, spiritual strength, international outlook, a religious mind, and patriotism. Notice the astonishing difference in the percentage that American parents chose for gentleness, 23%. 3 times as many Japanese parents chose the quality gentleness in their children. The others are not terribly far from each other, but when it comes to independence, the number of American parents choosing independence was double the percentage chosen by Japanese parents. International outlook, astonishing difference. 4 times as many Japanese parents chose international outlook for their children, and only 6% of US parents wanted that quality in their children. And finally, patriotism, although they are relatively small figures, 3 times as many Americans chose patriotism as did Japanese parents. Let me tell you something very interesting about this patriotism thing. It is not the same as it is in the US. I see American flags flying everywhere, from people's houses, from public places, you know, for any reason, doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be the 4th of July. And you go to Japan, and the only places you will see the Japanese flag flying is from government buildings. They don't have this quality of expressing their patriotism. It's almost as if the Japanese take it for granted. Of course we're patriotic. Why do we have to wave the Japanese flag? It's almost sometimes that they're ashamed to show too much patriotism. But challenge them on that point in some discussion, and oh boy, it sure comes out. But not publicly in the way that we wave the flag here in the United States. Ideas, another dimension. These are generally adopted concepts for meeting a society's needs. So over the millennia, a society realizes through trial and error experimentation what is a good idea, what will work for that culture, and what will not work. And so the ones that don't work eventually get discontinued and discarded. They are typically vehicles for solving that society's recurring problems. And those ideas eventually turn into institutions, like our institutions. Here are, Congress and the Senate and hospitals and medical care. The medical profession is an institution. The law courts, right, Supreme Court and all the other lower courts and so forth, become institutions in our society, have become over the years. Let's look at this idea, the relationships between men and women. In many cultures, especially Islamic ones, polygamy is permitted. That means that a man could conceivably have up to 4 wives. Now, don't believe it that many Muslim men can afford even 2 wives, let alone 4. So it's a question that it is allowed, but not very often can a Muslim man afford to have 4 wives or 3 wives or even 2. We believe in monogamy in our society and in the Western world because it's based on the equality of the sexes, right? A wife should have as much right as a man, and so in a marital relationship, only one at a time. Interactions between the sexes. We saw an earlier example of this where men gravitate to one part of the room when they're invited and women to another part. But in general, we have, for example, situations where men and women freely dance with each other, right? They go to a party, there's dancing. Men and women will mix together on a beach. Men and women will do things together, even play sports together and so on. In many, many cultures, men are segregated from women in just about every aspect of life. When I was in the United Arab Emirates, in Dubai, and then later on in Abu Dhabi, you would not believe this. They have one university with the faculties duplicated. All the women students go to this side of the campus and have exactly the same courses as the men on this side of the campus. So there's no co-education. They never mix together. And a professor teaching the women cannot teach the men on the other side of the campus. Let's look at interactions between the sexes. Some example here. This is in Colombia. It's actually not far from the capital of Caracas. And it's in a place called Totumo. The Totumo volcano is actually a mud volcano. It does not have, the mud is not hot, so you will not get burnt, but it's wonderful for massages. This is something that you should think about. Yeah, mud volcanoes. Apparently this mud is bubbling up from the ground, but it's cool. And so you don't have no harm in getting in there. You've got to be careful that it doesn't get into your ear hole and mouth. But there's the masseur, and he's giving this chap over here a rub down with the mud. And I think there's another one working over there. Yeah, you can see his white cap. So he's working on the lady over there in the corner, and so on. So yeah, very freely they will mix together in this mud volcano and have their 1.5 to 2 hours in the mud, feeling better when they come out, and then going to the river and washing all that gunk off. That could never happen in the Middle East or in Islamic countries. Never, 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 even if they had mud volcanoes. Lake Baikal. This is in Siberia, world's deepest lake. There is, sorry, I should say it this way, 20% of all the planet's fresh, unfrozen water is in this lake. It's the deepest lake in the world. So it has 20%. It's got about twice as much water as Lake Superior. And it's very cold, but families love to come from the city. Irkutsk is the nearest city. And they will come there and they'll sit on the beach and they'll have their omul, which is the fish that are peculiar or unique to this lake. And they either smoke it or they cook it and have it like this on their picnics. But you can see that they take some of their clothes off. This lady is actually taking everything off. It was a hot day and she's in her bra. And yeah, that's a typical scene in Siberia in summer. Now, let me tell you the story of Tatiana. Very interesting. I had no idea that such things were possible. Yes, I've seen many different cultures, but I wasn't prepared for this shock. I bought a ticket on the Trans-Siberian, starting in Vladivostok, went across Russia, took about 23 days to do it. I stopped in many places to savor the Russian lifestyle and so on. And I'm getting in there. I get to the compartment first. I'm alone, nobody else there. I put my luggage under the seat, get all ready, no idea who's going to join me. And suddenly Tatiana shows up with her husband. And he's carrying the luggage for her, and he puts it all away, arranges everything. And then I find out, I know a bit of Russian, and then I find out he's leaving her with me. He's not coming on this trip. And so he looks at me and he says, "Where are you from?" So I said in my broken Russian, "I'm from Australia." "Australia, what's your name?" "Thomas." "Thomas, tell me, are your teeth still your own?" And he tugged on his own teeth, you know. "And Thomas, how old are you?" And so I told him all these things. "Yes, my teeth are still the originals." "Ah, wonderful." And, you know, and all this stuff. And then he starts reciting Russian poetry to me. All of this in less than 20 minutes, meeting them on the train. Then there's a signal from the station master, the train is about to leave, everybody off who is not traveling. So he gets up, gives me this gigantic hug. "Thomas, have a wonderful time in Russia. Enjoy your trip. Please come back again." And he goes. And I'm thinking, wow, alone in the compartment with Tatiana. Okay, I hope I can handle this. Train starts to pull out of the station. And as it's pulling out of the station, Tatiana's cell phone rings. So she pulls it out of a handbag. "Hello." It's her husband, Victor. "Could he speak to Thomas, please?" Okay. Picked up the phone. "Thomas, have a wonderful trip in Russia and do enjoy and come back again." Now, just before he left, I forgot to say this part, he gives me a hug, but he never kisses his wife goodbye. And so that was it. Well, the rest of the trip, it was wonderful. Tatiana was a very gracious person. In fact, within a couple of hours when it was lunchtime, she took out all the stuff that she brings. People generally don't go to the dining car because the prices are a little bit high. So in Russia, they bring their own food, even if it's a 3-day trip for them. Tatiana brings out the marinated, I'm blanking out, aubergine. What are they called? Eggplant, thank you. Marinated eggplant, and she had chicken there and whole rye bread and all this stuff. And then she says to me, "Thomas, come on, join me with lunch." "Oh, I can't do that, come on. This is your lunch." "No, no, no." And she set out the table for me. "Sit down here," and she made me the sandwich and everything like this. So this went on for about a day and a half, and then it was time to get ready for bed. Now, I don't know this, but I think I picked up the idea. "Tom, I think it's time you left the compartment for a little while. Go down to the dining car, have a couple of vodkas." And so I gave it plenty of time. I gave her probably a full hour. When I came back, she was in her pajamas, under the blanket, and reading her novel. So we spent that was the compartment. She had her little silver teacup holder. And yeah, that was Tatiana. Amazing experience. I never thought they would mix the sexes like this. And that was until we got to Severodvikalsk, and then I got off the train, and I gave her a goodbye hug. But she was delightful, yeah. She was so happy that I could speak a bit of Russian. Relationships between men and women, the glorification of female beauty. We know that very much in the Western world, right? We parade them in the streets. Beautiful costumes, but barely covering anything. Anybody been to the Carnival in Brazil or similar places, Mexico and so forth, where they have the huge floats and all these sexy girls in skimpy clothing, you know, and the music and everything like this? Well, yeah, there is. We try to show as much flesh as we can. This is that parade again. And these are the Ecuadorian schoolgirls in the marching band and so forth. And we think not very much, I mean, we parade them as beauty queens, right? We have Miss America and we have Miss Universe and so forth. Let me talk about the use of sex appeal in advertising. Very, very common in Europe, especially Western Europe, France, Britain, Germany. United States, Canada, even Australia, New Zealand, right? Lots of sex appeal in advertising, in many ads, especially those things that are oriented towards fashion and makeup and hair coloring and so forth. Let me give you an example here. This is a French ad, and it was for a brand of Guy Laroche men's perfume or men's fragrance called Drakkar Noir. And the bottom reads, Drakkar Noir, la douce violence d'un parfum d'homme. The gentle violence of a men's fragrance. Okay, that works well in France. And Guy Laroche is everywhere. It's actually very well marketed in Europe. Now, supposing that they want to go into the Saudi market, which they do, why Saudi Arabia? Because per capita, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia is per capita the greatest consumer of perfumes, fragrances, colognes, and those related kinds of things. So much so that women will very often buy every single size of a given perfume or fragrance and all the different, what are they called, dispensing method, the sprays, the bath salts, everything like this. And the men too, particularly like the heavily scented women's perfumes and fragrances. So it's a huge market. And, with only 10 million people, they consume far more than per capita than any other country in the world. Why is this so? Well, because there's a cultural reason for it. Interactions between the sexes are extremely restrictive, very limited. Many, many things that you and I would take for granted here are taboo, absolutely taboo in Saudi Arabia. Women are not allowed to drive cars. There are no professional women athletes in Saudi Arabia. There are no cinemas. So if you want to watch a movie, you better have your VCR and your whatever DVD and play it at home. There are no cinemas. Certainly no bars. There's no alcohol consumption in Saudi Arabia. So a very restrictive society. But the one thing that they allow themselves is everything to do with pleasant smells. Why? Because the olfactory sense, the smelling sense, is very important in their culture. They use pleasant smells to build relationships. That's why you will very often see two men standing very close together. Right? In the West, what's a good rule of thumb? No pun intended. If you see two people talking in the United States or Canada, they will be at the distance where you can raise your arm, stick out your thumb, and you will be just about putting your thumb in their ear hole. Try it sometime. That's about the distance that we're comfortable with. In Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries too, much, much closer, okay? Within olfactory distance, the range is olfactory, so that within smelling distance. And so, yeah, they will smell each other and see whether everything's okay and can I trust this person and so forth. So they use that to build relations. So, well, Guy Laroche thinks, okay, I can't use this ad in Saudi Arabia. I mean, woman is grabbing his arm, and, leaving much to the imagination as to what might be happening below the picture frame. Give me that stuff, I want to try it down there. So what did they do? They wanted to have a same theme because many Saudi Arabian women travel to Europe. And so to have one campaign there and one campaign in Europe would weaken the promotional effort or result. So they redesigned the ad. Don't change too much, but redesign it for Saudi sensibilities. So here we are, the man's arm is clothed, he's wearing a suit, just the cuff barely showing, and the woman is just barely touching him with her fingernail. In the Saudi ad, they only have the brand name, no wording, just the Drakkar Noir, right to left, Drakkar Noir, and that's it. That's how the ad looks. So I couldn't find an exact replica of it, but it looks just like this with Saudi or with Arabian writing. Let's look at cultural attitudes. That's the third dimension of culture, isn't it? This is what American anthropologist Margaret Mead wrote once. The worst thing an American child can do is to tell a lie. The worst thing an English child can do is to be cruel to animals. And the worst thing a Japanese child can do is to be disrespectful to elders. So it's picking up cultural attitudes from these three different cultures. Look at this dog. Does he look healthy? Full of vitamins? I don't even know if it's a she or a he. I couldn't tell. Tail between the legs. Pretty sickly, right? This is again in Colombia. I think it's in that village of Taganga. And I have seen it before in many places. When people want a dog out of the way, they'll just pick up stones and throw it at it. And so the dog whimpers and scurries off somewhere. They don't care about dogs. They don't treat them the way we do here. We have them as pets. We take them to vets. We give them all kinds of shots. We feed them with vitamin-enriched food. There is even diet dog food specially made for dogs. All right? But no, certainly not. In many cultures, they're despicable, dirty animals. It's not our fault that that dog is there. They're street dogs and, you know, they reproduced on their own. Nobody told them to. And so, yeah, they're very neglected. Cultural attitude, isn't it? One more thing about cultural attitudes. A huge survey was done some years ago. 10,000 respondents in 37 cultural groups across 6 continents. It's a 5-year study. And men and women were asked about the importance of 5 traits in their marital partner. What do you look for before you marry? What do you want in your spouse? So what qualities should your partner have before you get married or to choose a partner? And I can't tell you all the details of this. I'm sorry about the small print on this table, but let's just quickly look at some of the features that they were asked about. You'll notice that the table is male, females, all the way down. And one is, what age difference should an ideal husband or an ideal wife have? And without a single exception, in all 37 cultural groups, the woman should be younger. Not by much, but younger. And the husband should be older. And then qualities like, is he a good, or is she a good, financial prospect? And we start to see some interesting figures coming up here. I was quite intrigued that in Asia, it was very important for women to have, for men to have female wanting, look at the numbers on the female over here, wanting the husband to be a good financial prospect. And a couple of other things, you know, do you want your partner to be ambitious, have good looks? And then comes chastity. Huge differences. So the people in Norway, the Netherlands, Spain couldn't care less whether you've slept with 100 partners before I married you. And when it comes to the Islamic countries in India, China, and so forth, huge differences. Now this is on a scale of 0 to 3, so look how important it is for Chinese men to have a chaste wife, 2.5, and amazingly enough, Chinese females want their men to be chaste before they're married, so 2.6 out of 3. We have some in the, let's see, where are we here? Islamic countries down here, yeah, Japan, not so important. Taiwan, again, quite high. So for Chinese people, it's very important that there were no premarital relations or sexual relations before marriage. So just a quick window on that one. Traditions, next to last. Traditions induce behaviors which are synchronized and time-bound. They're performed by a majority of the culture's members, and their purpose is to hold together the society and remind members of their cultural kinship. And that's why we have our 4th of July celebration In Canada, it's the 1st of July. That's Canada Day, national holiday. Chinese like to celebrate the beginning of the Chinese New Year, usually around end of January, early February, and so forth, to remind people of their cultural kinship. So we have the fireworks. This could be a scene anywhere. Beijing, Shanghai, Vancouver, British Columbia, United States, anywhere like that. Traditionally, the bride in many countries takes the arm of her father as she walks down the aisle to the altar. This is in the Czech Republic, in a tiny town with one church. Always have churches in these tiny towns. At least a church, if nothing else. And it's the town is called Křtiny, impossible to pronounce if you're not a full-blooded Czech. But it's one of those things that traditionally that's what the bride does. This is a very interesting tradition in Cuba. When a girl reaches the age of 15 in Cuba, no exceptions, every parent will make sure this happens to their 15-year-old daughter. She will go to a beautician, and she will be made up for hours in great detail. And then you can see here first her makeup, and then her hair. Everything like this could spend a long, long time getting prepared. And then you'll see that the other people looking after the business with the beautician there, they've got shoes already, so they pick the costume that she will wear. They lay it out on the bed. This is the dress she'll wear. This will go with this. Here are the shoes she'll wear. She might have some kind of hat or something like that, similar like that, and so forth. What are they preparing this girl for? She will be paraded that evening in an open car, in a convertible, up and down the streets, horns blaring, music playing, sometimes the trumpets, and so forth. And there might be some musicians, playing the guitar and so forth, and announcing that she is available. So that, come maybe a couple of years, they've got to know the parents, right? First have to know the parents if I'm a prospective husband. And so, yes, she is announced very publicly that she is ready to be married. Other kinds of parades that you'll find very often in Cuba are these people on stilts. Cubans love parade. They're a very musical society. I know Americans are not supposed to be... Time? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to start pushing it a little bit. Anybody been to Cuba? I know Americans are not allowed in Cuba unless on official business. Has anybody been to Cuba? An amazing country. You have. Good for you. It is it's a country full of music in their soul. Everywhere you go, at every cafe and every restaurant you sit down, the musicians will show up from nowhere, and they'll be playing. And this wonderful music, full of rhythm. I mean, Cubans are partly African and partly Spanish, so they're intermixed Spanish blood and West African blood. They were brought to Cuba many, many years ago as slaves, as you can imagine. Throat singers. These are in Canada's far north. These are Inuits, and their special tradition is throat singing. I wish I could demonstrate it for you, but I can't. It's a very deep guttural humming. It's something like, I can't do it, and they just, together, they have a microphone between them, and they're going back and forth. She'll go one tone, the other one will go the other tone. Then they'll change the rhythm, and so forth. So very important tradition for the Inuit. It takes years to master it, by the way. You notice the ladies were quite old. So it takes years and years for young people to learn that. Here's another parade, and this is in Bolivia. It's called the Devil's Parade. I don't know why, but it's around the time that you have Carnival in South America and Latin America. They celebrate something about getting rid of the spirit of the devil, bad spirits. So they will wear grotesque masks of all kinds, shapes, and colors. And the interesting thing was that they have this idea that we're going to spray everybody with whipped cream. Oh, thank you very much, So here I'm photographing a camera's completely covered, and clothing and everything. They have these giant canisters, and they buy them everywhere. Every shop sells them. And during the parade, you just get sprayed from all directions and everywhere. You never know where it's coming from behind, from front. But it's whipping cream, so people don't get terribly upset. Artifacts. Material evidence of a culture's activities. These are the objects of a culture that show what kinds of activities are important to them. What have they achieved in their history and in their development as a culture? What attitudes prevail, captured in those artifacts? What modes do they use for solving recurring problems? What modes for organizing their daily affair? And showing the artifacts that you find in a culture show people in the culture, but even visitors, what is important to these people. So you know that many artifacts are common to all cultures. Banks, baskets, bicycles, blankets, boats, books, brushes, right? Buses. You'll see them in every culture. The blankets I was telling you about. These women, every day they make the trip to an open marketplace 14,000 feet above sea level. I don't know how they handle it, but every day they're there from 6 a.m. until sundown. Then they pack it all up and go home. And next day they're there again. And so you can see the brightly colored blankets, shawls, clothing, and so forth. Here's another artifact, very common. This is in the little tiny islands of San Bernardo in the Pacific side of Colombia, or is it? No, Pacific side of Colombia, South America. And you can see that, colored pencils, ubiquitous, right? Scratch books, coloring books, and so forth. But some artifacts are very unique to some cultures. Ask any Japanese, what's important to you in your life as an artifact? And they'll say, onsen, the hot water places. Some with minerals in them, some just hot water. And they'll go there and they'll just soak in this boiling hot water. I put my hand in that pool and I couldn't leave it there. I don't know how she does it. But they're used to this, and the onsen to them is holy grail. I mean, Japanese love their hot springs, their mineral springs. So do Icelanders. So do many Europeans, Germans, Czechs, Poles. They love to go to their hot springs. You can get coverage under their medical plan. So if a doctor says, you got to go to the hot springs to cure your pancreas problem, no problem. He'll write out the prescription, and this patient will be covered. It will be covered by the Medicare that they have in their own culture. Others that are, I'll have to skip a little bit here. Some of you may have seen anybody been to Japan? Yeah, you've seen the food display cases. Aren't they a wonderful invention? They're models made out of silicone and plastic of the actual dish that you will be getting. What a great idea. Why don't we do it here? We have the technology to make these molds. Why don't we do it? It saves so much wrong choice, not knowing what the menu is in Greek, Italian, whatever. But you know exactly what you will be served when you pick that thing from a display case. You point to it, even you don't know Japanese, you say, I want that rubber chicken over there. And they will serve it to you. Snowmobiles, well, yeah, common to hear. Take a snowmobile to Costa Rica or Panama and they have no idea what this thing does. Where are the wheels, they'll say. Church baptism fountains, bidets, squat toilets. Anybody come across these kinds of things in foreign lands? Squat toilets, very, very common in Muslim countries, Arab countries. Japan has them too. Malaysia has them. Southeast Asia have them too. So things like the structures inside in the middle of a town, small town, will be an artifact of that particular one. This is in. I think it's in Croatia. These are incense sticks outside a temple in Macau, which is not far away from Hong Kong. And the Buddhists, when they come to pray, they will plant an incense stick and then light it. Buddhism is an interesting religion in that they have many forms of Buddha. So you might see statues like this, covered in gold, and in temples, or you might see replicas or statues of Buddha like this. Or if you go to Burma, in the capital city of Yangon, used to be called Rangoon, this is the giant reclining Buddha. It's made of porcelain, glazed porcelain. It is approximately 60 feet long and weighs 400 tons. And so you see, it looks like a woman, doesn't it? But Buddha, in the mind of Buddhists, has many, many images and forms. And just a quick note on this one. Islam, according to the Quran, anything like what we just saw is idolatry. So idolatry is forbidden in Islam. You will never see architecture with a human face on it. Never. You can scour the Muslim world and you will never see a human depicted in their architecture and in their decorations. So what they have turned to is geometry. The beauty of their architecture and the intricacy is in the geometry and how they built using geometrical shapes. So if you look at the detail, you know, exquisite decoration and geometry. And if you get even closer, you'll see that huge amount of work goes into making something like this, but no depiction of humans. Okay, final artifact I wanted to show you. One of the interesting things I've noticed all over the world, no matter where you are, is everywhere you go, there are teenage hangouts. That's where the teenagers hang out. So this is one. This is the southernmost city on the planet. It's Ushuaia in Argentina. This is the stepping off point for people who want to go to Antarctica. And so there they are, the teenage hangout, close-up of it. And now let's take the other extreme, go all the way to the tip of Greenland. Is there a teenage hangout there? Of course there is. Teenagers always collect together and, you know, do whatever they do. So I really need to cut it now because I've gone about 20 minutes over. I would love to tell you very quickly about some of these things, but I don't know. Ruth, what do you think? Keep going just a little.
Go for it.
Just a little bit? Okay, won't be long.
Let's go.
Symbols. Culture-specific symbolism in different forms, or if you like, on different dimensions. Numbers. We talked about unlucky and lucky numbers. Numbers, for example, the number 7 is considered, I think, by many Westerners as a lucky number. That's why Boeing went and designed planes that have lots of 7s in them. 707, 747, 767, and so forth. China, the lucky number is 8. It signifies wealth or fortune. So you will find many Chinese choosing license plates where there are as many 8s as they can order or put in them on their car license plates. In Japan, the lucky number is 7, but also sometimes 8, and I'm not sure why sometimes this and sometimes that one. We talked about the unlucky 2. Colors. In most parts of the world, the color, masculine color is blue, right? And we buy blue clothes for the boy, and we buy pink clothes for the girls. Pink for femininity is very much our culture. In Europe and many other parts of the world, yellow is the feminine color, not pink. And red is the masculine color. Whether you go to Spain or Southern Europe or cultures in Africa and so forth, you will find that red has the connotation of masculinity. Animals have different qualities depending on the culture we're in. Generally speaking, in our culture, we ascribe elephants as having good memory, right? If you want to denote a trademark that says lots of good memory or plenty of memory, they will use an elephant. Elephant's supposed to remember things. But in other parts of the world, the elephant has no such connotation. Elephant denotes toughness, sturdiness, durability. Let me think. Tigers, very respected animals in Southeast Asia, tigers and oxen are regarded as with great honor or great value in those cultures. Objects, let me think. Objects like, well, let's skip that one. Signs and gestures. Around the world, if you've noticed, when you go abroad, notice the way people communicate. Non-verbal language, not just the words they're saying, because you may not understand them, but watch their non-verbal language. In Italy, they throw their arms around a lot. Che succede? Portaki la macchina. Questa domenica non andiamo alla chiesa. You know, and so you got to look out when you pass two Italians in the street. You know, you're likely to be hit. In Japan, no such movements whatsoever. Arms usually down, you know, talking to each other politely. When young girls see something funny, they will always cover their mouths so that you don't see their teeth, right? They'll giggle like this. Even with business negotiations and so forth, you will find people in the station clutching their, you know, the office workers, they'll clutch their briefcase, always have their briefcase, take it home, bring it back. And they'll just stand there like this, you know, very quietly. In India, people talk a lot with their hands, you know. The royal family of Britain, what do you think they are? They are not British. They are Indian. You say how? How are they Indian? They are all descendants of Queen Victoria, Empress of India. Queen Elizabeth, Indian. Prince Andrew, Indian. Prince William, Indian. Princess Anne, Indian. All Indian. They all live in the same house, Indian. They all in the family business, Indian. They all have arranged marriages, very Indian. Huh? They all want sons, daughters, no good. Indian. They're all Indian, except Prince Charles. He's African. He's African. If he were Indian, he'd have smaller ears. Thank you very much. Yeah, depends very much what it is, and perhaps how severe the transgression is. If you make a minor cultural gaffe, I think they will understand that, well, he's a foreigner, so we understand he doesn't know our culture very well. If it would be something like foot in the face, or keeping your shoes on, going inside a house when you're invited, I think you would upset them quite a lot.
Would they say anything, or would they just...
No. Generally, you know, it's a very interesting thing what I learned. I lived 2 years in Japan. I still don't know what the Japanese word for no is. Japanese don't like to say no. They will say yes for everything. You go into the store and you're looking for honey, and you don't have the honey. I know. Okay, so you don't have honey? Yes. Oh, you do have honey? Yes. No. Sorry. And then you got it all confused. They don't like to say no, and rarely do you hear the word no. I remember seeing a business clip or video or something. An American was doing business in Japan, and his counterpart asked him a very pointed question. He said, I think his name was Dalton or something. And, you know, the Japanese always add san to every name. They'll never call you by your first name, by the way, always family name. So, Dalton-san. In Japan, when we say maybe, it means no. They will say maybe when they want to say no, and you're supposed to get the hint. What does maybe mean in English? Does it mean no, or does it mean yes?